Good evening, and welcome to Future Choices. My name is Snedeker, and I am the producer and moderator of this educational series focusing on women's reproductive rights. Day after day, I read that women's reproductive rights, the right of a woman to control her body, is in peril, with onslaughts from the federal and state level and little recourse foreseen in the federal courts. So I've come today to Washington to a Women's Campaign Forum to seek comfort about that the grim predictions about women's reproductive rights are not quite as bad as my readings would make me believe. I welcome to Future Choices Bennett, who is the CEO and the president of the Women's Campaign Forum.
That's great.
Sam is better known. Siobhan is better known
as Sam. That's right.
So Sam, what do you have to say to me and the thousands, millions of other women's advocates for women's rights that the dumping that we took in November of 2010 might not be quite as bad as I'm thinking right now?
I think it's worse. So I think the comfort actually comes from the fact that maybe, finally, we've disturbed complacency. I think one of the biggest problems we have in this country right now around this very basic fundamental right that, quite frankly, women in Europe don't have to worry about, right? But here in the United States, we find it continually challenged, is that I think complacency has been our biggest enemy. I think once Roe versus Wade was passed, an awful lot of folks, including probably many of us in the listening audience, said, okay, we're done. And then, ever increasingly, no surprise to any of us that are passionate about this issue, somebody in some smoke-filled room read the data that shows that when you elect women to office, now remember our organization, Women's Campaign Fund, is the oldest organization that's been working to help financially support women when they run for office. We've been around 36 years, and we're nonpartisan, but this very basic fundamental issue about a woman's or any American's right to make their own reproductive choices and options, those decisions for themselves, not the government, has been a key fundamental litmus of this organization since its founding. And I think there was a point where someone looked at the research that shows that when you elect a woman to office, you elect someone who is far more likely to be very relatively progressive on issues like healthcare, education, the environment. And there's a whole body of folks out there that don't want to see that happen. And I honestly think that at that moment or sometime after, because of that fact or some other fact, they chose this very basic fundamental right as a wedge issue to use as a political bludgeoning tool and put a ton of money behind it, and they've been extraordinarily successful. And so what we have to do is stop being complacent, and what we have to do is reinvent our own way of talking about this very fundamental right, because what we're doing right now isn't working, the results show.
And so what does Women's Campaign Forum do to begin to stop the backslide? Well,
I think we do something that's fundamentally probably the most important thing that needs to be done, that everyone is underinvesting in now, and that is we need to create in this country a sensibility that it's important for women to run. Now, in the United States, women seriously consider running for office 50% less than the guys do. A guy wakes up in the morning, he looks in the mirror and he goes, see a senator. Right? Women wake up in the morning, there's a simple test you can do. Walk out of any door in any country, any state in this country, and grab the first guy you see and say, hey, we got an opening on school board, will you run? And the guy will go, sure. And then you'll ask him a follow-up question. So what are your credentials to run for office? And he'll say, I don't have any. And then you say, well, you'll still run, right? And he goes, sure. Go up to any woman who has a master's in education and ask her if she'll run for that school board seat. Guess what she says? I'm not qualified, right? So the guy has no credentials. I'll run. The woman has a master's in education. I'm not qualified. That's the single biggest stumbling block we have. The second biggest stumbling block is the one that you hit the nail on the head. women don't run and don't even think about running because they're concerned about work-life balances. And the other thing that they're considered about is they're terrified what the media is going to do to them if they run and the collateral damage to their families. So what we do is we focus on getting lots more women to consider running for office at very early stage. We're the only one that does that work. What we try to do is get as many women's names as possible, get them on our program, which is sheshouldrun.org. And I'm really excited. We got all 18,000 women of SEIU Healthcare Pennsylvania to join She Should Run at the end of December. So our goal is to get tens of thousands of women across this country to get into She Should Run and start the process of thinking about running for office.
So you're promoting a revolution,
a movement. That's what we need. We got 500,000 elected positions in this country. 250,000 should be held by women. Right now, only a fraction are. So we've got to get tens upon hundreds of thousands of women just thinking about, and not only thinking about running, we need other women to say, hey, I'll support a woman if she runs. I'll donate money. One of the key research projects we had back in 2006 was something called Vote With Your Purse. Guess what? Men are very comfortable giving to candidates. Women, they'll give to charity. They won't give politically. Well, that's a huge stumbling block. Women aren't getting supported by women financially when they run for office. So we need women to do that too.
Oh, see, okay, you've got tens of thousands of women lined up.
Well, not really lined up. We're warming up. We're warming them up.
But what are the credentials that you demand of these the candidates that you're going to?
That's a good point.
Because I'm thinking of some local elections where a woman was elected and I'm not so happy.
Well, another thing that makes She Should Run is sort of a standalone program we have that has no litmus, no value, anything. We just want a gazillion women doing this. But we at WCF, with our PAC, the women that we endorse, and again, we are the oldest women's PAC in the country. We have a very strict litmus, but we're very different than most political action committees, or PACs as they're called. Most PACs invest in candidates because they perceive that they're viable, right? That they can win any particular race. We actually invest in the woman. Is this woman the type of woman who, whether she wins this race or not, is destined to have a terrific political career? Does she have what it takes? And some women aren't quite there yet, and those women we nurture along until they get there. But unlike most other organizations that endorse for the race, we endorse the woman for the course of her political career and nurture them along.
And do you train her in articulating reproductive health issues? Or?
Well, keep in mind, we're not Planned Parenthood, and we're not NARAL.
No.
But what we do is we train women what's the best way to talk about choice. That you get people in your wheelhouse, you don't alienate them. Don't start with abortion. If you start with abortion, you end with abortion. Start with, we all agree, for example, that an individual should be making their own important life decisions, not the government. If you start with that frame, we got the world, 81% of Americans with you. So that kind of training is what we give our women candidates, is what will help you on the stump. Talk about choice in a way that doesn't alienate people but brings them into you.
And what do you foresee as some of the major issues that are going to be on our minds in the near future that are being dealt with at a national level?
Well, to be honest, I think that the Democrats and the Republicans are figuring out, what's going to be on the agenda. We're pretty early on for that. But if I was a betting woman, I think we're going to see choice be uniquely embattled.
From a funding perspective or from a rights perspective?
Well, it's always challenged on the funding perspective, and we've undone some of the damage that was done to it during the Bush administration, and some of the damage that was done, quite frankly, starting in the Reagan administration. But I would say funding's going to be tantamount, and will always be. For some unfortunate reason, the Republican Party has decided that federal funding for anything is tantamount to heresy. So we have pro-choice Republican women that we support who have a very difficult time supporting federal funding of reproductive choices and options. So I would predict funding is going to be a big issue around choice. I mean, clearly, I think it's going to be the economy of the economy. Wait, if you're asking me personally, I think it's the economy stupid. Sort of echo from the Clinton administration. I think that that's going to be first and foremost. But in terms of issues we really care about, I think choice will be in the chopping block. And I would predict that Obama's going to be saving us more than once in refusing to sign some things that are.
Now, what do you mean when you say choices on the chopping block?
I think
define choice for me.
I think the whole spectrum, reproductive choices and options, everything from prevention measures to global funding for family planning to a woman's right to choose. And I think that you're going to see a lot of assaults on any one of those pieces of the spectrum in this current environment, because there are a lot of Republicans who see, quite frankly, you have Democrats like Stupak who see this, who saw this as a way to make a name for themselves from the heinous sort of Stupak-Pitts amendment, right? So I would predict that we're going to see a lot of challenge there. But the good news about that is, again, it disturbs complacency. It wakes people up. And I think we are overdue for that kind of wake-up call, because I have two daughters, 24 and 26. They've grown up with reproductive choice. And most young women assume it'll always be there for them. I doubt if many young women understand the tenuous nature of that right for us. And that is where the wake-up call needs to happen. Because we need, particularly in my opinion, young women engaged. And that's why we do so much work with young women, in sensitizing them, making them aware, getting them excited about running for office, get them excited about supporting women candidates. Because let's be honest, that's where our future is, these young women.
Well, what about the pro-choice Republicans who have been elected? What
you mean all two of them in the federal level?
What can they say that would make could have some resonance among their colleagues about why to fund?
Well, to be honest, I feel that Olympia Snowe and Susan Collins have more than pulled their weight in that area. If you listen to either one of them, they're remarkably articulate. But I think Olympia and Susan, to be honest, I think have done a remarkable job of being unwavering in whole about this issue. But the problem is, they talked about this being the year of the woman. I'll be honest, that was unutterable nonsense, because Republican women, particularly moderate Republican women, got creamed in the primaries. And the only Republican woman that comes out of the current primary configuration are, quite frankly, very, very right-wing. And you even have women like Meg Whitman, who's relatively moderate, basically not willing to share their moderate positions because it could hurt them electorally. So.
But who do you see as some of the other strong, articulate...
Kirsten Gillibrand.
New York loves to hear that.
Kirsten Gillibrand.
No, but why do you...
She is amazing. And not that, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is another amazing young woman. What's powerful about Kirsten is, and she's beginning to get some credit for it, and she's been one of our, not only is she a WCF endorsed candidate, but she's been very supportive of our work and very, very helpful. Kirsten has a gift for not seeking the spotlight, doing the kind of work across the aisle and behind the scenes that needs to be done to make things happen. And we saw that in Stupak-Pitts. She was a real driving force in Stupak-Pitts and has got barely any credit for it.
Oh, no, because I was not aware that she
was. Absolutely she was. But Kirsten is very gifted at doing not so much the backroom deal, but the reaching across the aisle, the ducking into the corner, come on, we got to do something about this, and grabbing it and demonstrating genuine leadership. So I would say that she has been extraordinarily satisfying to watch. Another one that's coming up, I would advise everyone to watch for, is Terry Sewell. She is the first African-American woman elected in Alabama. We helped her very early on in her race. I worked personally with her very closely. There were two wonderful women that ran in that primary. Smoot was her opponent, and Sewell, both terrific African-American women. Terry won. And she's, I think we can see great things coming out of her. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I was deeply disappointed when she did not become the chair of the DCCC. I think she
DCCC being?
The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Now the wonderful New York-based Steve Israel took that position, and everyone loves Steve, in New York. But Debbie had paid her dues raised way more money for the DCCC than anybody else, and really, in my opinion, deserved to be chair of the DCCC. But I would predict she's young, like Kirsten. They both have young children. They're fabulous role models for the women of this country that you can do this. Remember that work-life balance concern that women have that prevents them from running for office. Well, I can't think of two better examples.
Wow, yes.
Because not only are they congresswoman and senator, not only do they have young children, they're both in leadership positions. They do the extra, they go the extra mile. And I think we're going to see great things out of both of those young women.
That's great. Well, let me ask you some of the questions that you asked those of us who receive misrepresentation there to think about for this coming year. But before we get into those questions, tell me more about misrepresentation. Tell our
well, it's a great play on words. Again, our wonderful political director, Aaron Kuchar, came up with a Ms. representation. So we are misrepresented in this country because, of course, we represent 51% of the population, 55% of the voters, but yet U.S. Congress is now only 16%, the first backslide in the number of women in elected office in 30 years. First backslide. So we were at 17, now we're at 16. And then if you go down to the state level, I think we're still at 24. And then the local level is a little worse, actually. So women are grossly underrepresented. And sometimes people ask me, well, why do we need more women in government? And I was like, well, because think about it, right? As recently as, I think it was as recently as 20 years ago, all the lab rats that the research was being done on were male. Male rats. Now that sounds like a little thing, but I think it's so reflective. If you only have men making decisions at every level, and women not being included at all, well then those basic fundamental things like, well, we do need some female rats because female rats are different than male rats when we're doing research, never get addressed. And then research really has substantiated that women decision make differently than men do. And so therefore, because they decision make differently than men do, they govern and legislate differently than men do. And that fundamental difference is the point. That difference is what's needed. There are some pundits now that say that that Wall Street meltdown that we just experienced, that was the handmaiden of this recession, might not have ever happened if we'd had more women in leadership on Wall Street. Now why is that? Well, women risk take. See, essential to decision making is risk taking. Every decision you make is a risk, right? Well, women risk take differently than men. When in the face of uncertainty, women will pull back. In the face of uncertainty, often men will go, let's go, right? Well, you need both those voices. If you have too much of the let's go, you're going into risky places that are not reasonable risks. We saw that in Wall Street. You know, the whole derivatives blow up, right? So we need women in ever-increasing numbers because we need their decision-making ability to balance out how men make decisions.
And so that's the theme of misrepresentation?
Absolutely. And so we are misrepresented in electorally. We're not misrepresented anymore as voters, right? There was a time when we weren't even voting, right? It took us 125 years to get the vote. But we're misrepresented in who's making the legislative and governing decisions in this country. So what misrepresentation is all about is providing, sort of from the ground level, the details about what's happening out there across the country when it comes to women in elected office. And how can we fix that? How can we change it? But more than anything, we want to rattle everybody's cage, because when I speak nationally and I say we're ranked 90th in the world in the number of women in elected office, there's always a collective gasp. We're behind Cuba and Afghanistan. All right?
Yes.
Right?
That's
So
all right.
misrepresentation is about disturbing complacency, it's about public awareness and giving immediate information to our supporters and folks out there across the country about what's going on.
And if my friends in Westchester County want to receive this,
all they have to do is just sign up for it at info@wcfonline.org. Our website is Women's Campaign Forum, wcfonline.org. And they can just sign up and off to the races.
Okay, well, let me throw back at you some of the questions you asked us.
Sure.
The misrepresentation. I think we've pretty well concluded that 2010 was a bad year for women.
Bad year.
Yeah.
The worst, actually, in 30 years.
Do you think that the nasty tone of American politics, which we witnessed in 2010, is going to deter women in the future?
Absolutely. They cite that as the second biggest reason they don't run.
Because...
Well, and it was I was had the privilege of ringing the bell on the stock market with Geraldine Ferraro, another wonderful New York product. She's incredible. And she said to me, she said, I was talking to her about women's concerns, about how the media handles them. And she said, my theory was sticks and stones don't break your bones, you know. And sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I said, Jerry, well, it's interesting. Because of the horrific sexism and misogyny I experienced when I ran for U.S. Congress and when I ran for mayor, really drove me to start a national initiative which has blossomed called Name It, Change It, which is all about fighting sexism against women in the media. And the research that came out of that, and that was funded by an organization that I am involved with called Political Parity, and was funded by the Embry Family Foundation, and we did that with Women's Media Center from New York, and they're great. Yeah. So the Lake Research, Linda Lake, her research shows that when a woman experiences even mildly sexist or misogynistic references in the press, that is just as corrosive to a voter's likelihood to vote for her than highly misogynistic references such as I experienced when I ran for Congress. And Jerry was like, really? I said, yes. And then when I ran for Congress and this terrible stuff started coming at me, I was advised by national consultants to ignore it. The research shows that when a woman, even mild sexism, like focus on hair and makeup, such as Hillary Clinton experienced, right, is just as corrosive as a woman being called the W word, the C word, the P word. These are all things I dealt with when I ran for Congress. But just as corrosive to a voter's likelihood to vote for her. But the happy news is that as long as she goes to camera, to print, right away out there in the public and says, that's sexist, in any way, as long as she uses the S word, as we call it, the voters go, oh, you're right, that's sexist. Oh, and you know what? I bet her opponent was behind that. So what she does is she regains all the votes she lost, which were significant, and then she bumps ahead because the voters blame her opponent. So I think that you are never going to see a change in the nasty tone of politics. All right? That's politics. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? But what we are working to change at Women's Campaign Fund, working with our partners, is sexist and misogynistic references against any woman, regardless of party, her position on choice, because you attack one woman that way, you attack all women that way, and that's the second biggest deterrent for women running for office.
Interesting.
Whenever you have redistricting, women are always at the low end of the stick, historically, because for whatever reason, if you're in a state where you're losing seats, women have to work awfully hard to make sure that they're not on the chopping block. And that's been a perennial historic problem. The other challenge is that when new seats are created, like Texas is getting 4 new seats. 4. Wow. And a whole bunch of others, like 6 other states, or a few more, getting 1 additional seat. You know, immediately people kind of go to the usual suspects, the guys, right? And those names get floated and fielded. And quite frankly, historically, the women get ignored. So another initiative we have, which we're loosely calling Rank and File, named after Jeanette Rankin, who was the first woman to serve in Congress. She was a progressive social worker. She's a Republican. And when we've named this after her, Rank and File. And the idea behind it is to go into these states where we know we have these open seats and present to the press the names of women leaders who should be considered for those seats and get the press to start talking about it by putting them on this elite list called the Rank and File. So we're very much hoping that we can have an impact in that way. And something I'd just like to point out, this Name It, Change It initiative, fighting media sexism, the web address for that is nameitchangeit.org.
Okay.
All
great.
right, and we'd love for your listeners to sign up to that, because that's, believe it or not, we just got our 1,500,000th hit on the website for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge issue, and we need everyone's help to fight this kind of treatment of women, electeds and candidates, by the press.
Okay. All right, sign away.
That's right, you got it.
Okay, so you have suggested that we sign up for Name It, Change It. But what else is on your agenda for us, activism, that we as concerned voters, as people who are really interested in preservation and enhancement of women's reproductive rights, what should we be doing?
I think, number one, we all need to reframe how we talk about choice. An important point that we can bring up to folks is what we are all about is protecting an individual's right to make their own important life decisions, not the government. Because essentially, the flip side of the elimination of Roe versus Wade is the government's making decisions for us, mm-hmm. instead of us being able to make our own decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's a very powerful way to be talking about choice. In addition to that, when I have great success, when I talk about that international economists now point to a woman's ability to make her own reproductive choices and options is the single biggest variable in the likelihood of a developing nation's likelihood to advance. It is more important than education. It is more important than access to clean water. It is the single most important issue. Mm-hmm. So, ironically, the richest nation in the world considers on a regular basis to eliminate the one thing that is the single most important economic factor to ensure a nation's success. And we want to throw it out with the baby with the bathwater. So I think that reframing choice as a business case, important and essential to the economic lifeblood of this nation, is a very important movement. Because we've got to come up with new ways to talk about this, because the old ways we've been having clearly are not working. The other thing that we can do is clearly we have incredible organizations like Planned Parenthood, led by the amazing Cecile Richards. She's incredible. That are worthy and need of support. As is NARAL, led by the terrific Nancy Keenan. So I think that continuing our support for Planned Parenthood, continuing our support for NARAL is very, very important, because they're the ones that are keeping the lights on in clinics across the country. Right? And then when we talk about how can we have the most strategic, leveraged impact on choice, well, quite frankly, it's supporting women that support choice, it's supporting men that support choice. We have to step out and be far more aggressive and assertive in our support of candidates to support choice, because we haven't been as vocal and as energized as we should be around that. That's if every candidate in this country, if every elected knew they would lose their race if they didn't support choice, guess what would happen? Right? Yeah. Well, so we at WCF offer a couple ways that folks can be directly engaged in very low-cost, easy, no-cost ways. By signing up on our website, wcfonline.org, you'll start getting our regular information that we use to educate people about how to talk about choice, how to help candidates, who are the candidates. We share with you the names of all our candidates. You can then donate to them. And so we really are in the trenches, the first line of getting women their first check, getting them started, getting them shaped, getting them out there. There's not a tenured woman who supports choice that's on the Hill that didn't get her first check from us. Olympia Snow, Susan Collins, Barbara Boxer, Nancy Pelosi, you name them, we were the first ones there to give them their first check. The other thing, of course, is to sign up for sheshouldrun.org so that you can start getting information about, well, what does it mean to run for office? How can I help women when they run for office? And nominate some other talented women that you know, which is very, very important. And then help us fight sexism in the media with nameitchangeit.org. And of course, like any organization, any financial contributions are always appreciated. But we have lots of ways that we can help people be engaged.
I want to thank you very much, Sam. You have given us a lot to think about, and certainly have made it clear that there are challenges that we need to pursue. And I want to thank our Westchester audience for joining us tonight, and to urge you all to pursue, for the sake of women's reproductive rights in our United States. Thank you and good night.